Hi, everyone. Welcome to Flock Talk. I'm Erin Morgan.
And I'm Walker Ball, and we work for the members of the Ontario Sheep Farmers.
Today, we're joined by Sarah Loten, an expert on livestock guardian dogs. Welcome, Sarah. Thanks so much for doing the podcast.
Yeah, no, it's an important topic. So I really felt really called as soon as I saw the message. I thought it was a good idea to do it because it's something that I don't think gets talked about nearly enough, and it's a big part of sheep farming in Ontario, that's for sure.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, how you first began working with livestock guardian dogs?
Well, we have a large flock and have had a larger flock even in the past, but sustained a very large flock for almost 30 years, actually 25 to 30 years. And we have always done at least a hybrid of pasture and indoor management. So our need for livestock guardian dogs has always existed when we've had animals outside, even if we lambed indoors and overwintered indoors. And for about the past 10 years, at least, if not 12 years, we have exclusively kept our sheep outdoors. Like they come into barns for special care or for sorting or, any of the things you have to do with sheep. But they don't live indoors. Like that's not their home base. So livestock guardian dogs are absolutely key. Like I cannot function without them in Eastern Ontario. And I would say that's probably true for most of Ontario from what I've heard. If you have sheep outside, unless you've got them in a very tight space, quite close to the barn, and even then, I doubt whether you can get away with not some predation at some point. You just probably can delay it a bit if you have very tight. But for me, yarding is similar to barns that it's a whole different style of management, right? So if animals are outside, they deal with coyotes, predators, ravens. We have had bears, we even had a cougar attack last year. So we have a constant flow of predators that we have to deal with. And if you think I'm out in the wilderness, I'm not. I'm near Perth, Ontario. And we have actually a fair bit of development happening around us. And I think the predation's almost gotten worse since there's been more development. I think coyotes are the primary predator, and they are getting a little crowded, and so they're opportunists. So they're moving into areas that they want to, and that's our farm. So it's been pretty big. But I can't say there's ever been a time when there wasn't ever an option not to have a livestock guardian dog, really.
I live in town, and last year I had a juvenile coyote stalk me through town, and I had to scream like so loud. I'm sure people were really concerned. And I had to like charge it, and it kept coming for me. And thankfully I didn't have my dog because he's a small guy. But we've got coyotes in the neighborhood now, so that doesn't surprise me. Sarah, so what's the advantage of, you touched a bit on it, but what's the advantage of having livestock guardian dogs on your sheep farm, and how do they differ from other working dogs?
Well, we do have two sets of guardian dogs that I very much in my mind divide between herding dogs and livestock guardian dogs. You can sort of get away without having herding dogs. That's another sort of whole area of knowledge that I have really pursued in the last little while because, first of all, I love it. And secondly, it's incredibly effective when you have animals out. So the livestock guardian dog pretty much lives with the sheep. We have two types of livestock guardian dogs, and that's not uncommon for bigger farms to have what they call patrolling dogs, which tend to be the Asian or Eurasian breeds. So we have an Armenian Gamper. I'll give that as an example. I don't want to speak about other breeds, but that's, and they're very much patrollers. I kind of call them the thugs of the operation. They're awesome with people, which is important for us because of the development and also just because of the activity on our farm. But they don't take no for an answer, and but they're not aggressive in the sense that they're not barking constantly. And they basically are patrolling, marking, kind of barking when needed, responding, chasing away. But if you get a very persistent coyote, they will actually go in and kill, which I have never had happen with the Pyrenees and Maramas. I've never ever had them. I've had them fight and tussle, but they always back away eventually if you get a very persistent coyote. But the beauty of the Pyrs and the Maramas and I call them the European breeds. Basically, there's different things. So those are the ones most people see, or the great white livestock guardian dog, they're calling it these days because it's such a mishmash, is they're sticky dogs. They stick with the flock by and large. I mean, there are some that definitely wander, but their primary focus is the flock, and they really live with the flock. The Armenian Gampers don't live, and a lot of the Asian breeds don't live with the flock. They tend to circulate around the flock, so they kind of create a predator sort of free zone. And then if the predator breaches that zone, then the Pyrs and the Maramas kind of do the alert, the sound, and they're with the sheep all the time. So if the other dogs are off sleeping or just patrolling somewhere else, and they'll come flying over. And I see it all the time. You see this kind of working together. And frankly, since we've had these two combinations of breeds, our predation levels have gone way, way down. Except, this is one downside to both Armenian Gampers and the Pyrs, is that when I started grazing solar farms, which we do now, I didn't mention that in my intro, but we graze solar farms quite a bit. The Gampers don't tend to like to leave home because they're really guarding territory. They're not guarding sheep. And you're part of the territory. The sheep are part of the territory, but they're not guarding the space. And so they really get distressed when you pull them to a different site and then pull them to another site, 4 weeks later or whatever. And so it's like, they just start to establish territory and then you throw them in another environment. And I'm experimenting a bit with a younger dog to see if they start that way, whether they're a little less stressed by it. But I certainly had a hard time convincing a 4-year-old dog to kind of, be air launched into a site by truck. and to whereas the Pyrs and the Marama, we have two of each at this point. We've had more, we've had less. The Pyr Marama combos are like absolutely on it in the site. They don't care whether they're in the site. They're just actually so relieved to get off the truck and be back with their sheep that they just, and then they take it very seriously that they kind of patrol right within their sheep all the time. But they're very close to the sheep all the time. So, which kind of makes sense almost with the coloring, right? When you think of the traditional, the Gampers are kind of a sandy brindle color. They really vanish into the background. Like I honestly, they spook me out sometimes at night. I don't even see them and they suddenly appear. And then but the white dogs stick with the white sheep and they really blend in with the flock. Oh. So I think you got thousands of years of history, especially with Gampers, like 3,000, they think at least years of history of them doing this job. But you have to put them in an environment where the job is appropriate for them. That's the key thing. And you probably will get into that later. But there's a whole management. It doesn't just happen. You don't just push a button and it starts happening. You have to sort of set up the environment. So I can talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you've got a sheep operation. Somebody has phoned you and they've sort of given you the rundown of their sheep operation. How do you help them choose the right breed or the right individual dog? I mean, you can talk about Maramas and Pyrenees, but they each have personalities in themselves.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And I've heard challenges of some Pyrs like running away and like covering a lot of distance and not staying with the sheep. And so how do you help someone who's getting started with dogs? How do you help them pick the right?
No, and I do this quite a bit, actually. I do have people contacting me quite regularly and I'll advise them. So I kind of look a little bit at their personality and their what their needs are. So if you have a smallish flock and you're going to keep them within a 25, 50 acre radius to the barn, and you're thinking of night yarding, or you have the ability to herd them into a small group, then a Pyr is probably your best bet because you don't need a big, huge patrolling dog to manage that. Although those dogs do like to be, that was another thing about the Gampers. It's a little weird that some people don't realize, and it took me a while to understand it too, is they actually, you see the camp, like they came originally, and not even that long ago, it's still this way in parts of Armenia, they're kind of semi-nomadic shepherding camps. So they kind of move around as family groups. And so they have to be able to get along with people, which is why they're good with people. And they have to get along with other dogs. So they are in an environment where they're constantly shifting, but within this sort of central camp. And then so they kind of see their camp as home base. And they're not doing the porch princess thing. They're just more, which is what people call dogs who sort of just hang out on the porch and hang out with the family. But sometimes you think they are. Like I honestly, until I got a tracker, didn't realize how much these dogs were doing. Because during the day, they're like collapsed, close to the house and hot. And, but as soon as an alarm gets sounded, they're gone. And they're huge dogs, like big dogs and powerful. But so it depends on what you've got. I find the combination of the Pier and the Gamper, in our case, highly, highly effective. Like it's the most effective thing that I've had. But that's a lot of tool, if I could call a dog a tool, if you don't need it. It's like getting a huge tractor if you're just, doing a small acreage. But they do get along well with people. And that doesn't mean they become pets necessarily. They can be, but it's not that they have to be pets or anything. But they do need something to guard the big dogs. The Piers also need something to guard, but they can they're much more comfortable in smaller acreages. They don't need to patrol and all that kind of thing. So like we're covering 300 plus acres, and then plus the solar farm. So we're splitting dogs up, and we probably don't have quite enough dog power actually for what we're trying to cover, but it's mostly working. But yeah, so I would say look at that. And the big thing is, if you want a working dog, make it a working dog and buy it from a working farm or working environment or a place that they're breeding for working dogs. Because something like the Gamper is a rare breed, and you have to, not all the place, like there's only a few places they come from, and they're not like huge working farms, but that's so they're putting them out with animals right away and they're puppies at that point, right? So, and you can't, and the other piece to getting a dog that I think is really important is, my heart goes out to all these dogs that end up in rescues because people buy pets or buy them because they're cute and fluffy, and they also are, to be honest, a real pain in the neck when they're about 18 months old. So between 12 and 18 months old, you kind of would like to park them somewhere and then revive them. Pull them out of the parking space when they're a little older, because they do go through a really kind of annoying adolescent phase. But if you have a working farm, you got to, first of all, work through that phase, and second, and be okay with that phase and have a place to maybe put them if they start doing certain behaviors. But if you want a working dog, you have to get it from a working dog environment, or that's the intention. We have bought some dogs from rescues. We've had a few disasters, frankly, and we've had one very good experience recently. But the ones I had the most success with were puppies. Like if they were, I bought them as puppies. So basically I'm raising them in the environment that they need to work in. But so it's, and there's some good rescues out there that if you have a reputable rescue, they kind of give you enough information in the background, and that's really important, and vaccinate and do all those things, so.
You mentioned trackers in your previous answer. And that, as I'm wondering about trackers and also like shock collars. How do you keep your animals, how do you keep your dogs on the property, especially the ones that you're hiring to roam? How do you keep them on your property? Do you use collars to do that?
Yeah, so we have tracking collars, like they're called tracking collars. I'm sure there's other brands, but that's the one we use. And highly effective for keeping track of where the dog goes. Like you can kind of see, and especially in the solar site where there's not a lot of line of sight, it's really important for me to be able to find the dog right away, because I actually know, if I know where the dog is, I also know where the sheep are. So it's actually really helpful for that. And I also just to make sure, like if there's a sudden drop in activity level, there might be something wrong with the dog, that kind of thing. So these dogs patrol, both the Gampers, the European breeds, the Maremas and Piers, they tend to move about 12 to 14 kilometers a night. And the campers can go up to 40 kilometers a night, to give you an idea. Now, to keep them in, right at this point, I would dearly love to get a GPS collar with that I could set the fencing that way, but they're quite expensive, and the batteries are still. They're working on longer life batteries, and I think it's about to come out, but they're about to come out. But they're still iffy, and I know people exchange collars constantly, and that is maybe an option because I do check on the dogs every day. So, but then I'd have to buy 2 collars, so we're looking at about $1,000 per collar, right? So that's like a couple $1,000 just to, and that's one dog. So I'm feeling, I'm a little frustrated by that. I really wish the price would come down so that it was a little more financially manageable. But the tracker collars are much cheaper, and it's a really useful management tool for me to have a sense of where sheep are moving, especially with the white dogs. I can kind of track the movement of the sheep, where they're typically grazing. We don't graze in really tight areas and move them all the time. I actually free graze and have a breed of sheep that is very effective at that. So we don't like put them in tight areas and move them through. So all the dogs and the sheep have to be really using their instincts, and I call my sheep a bit feral. They are a bit feral. You have to, but they are very effective and very productive as long as I let them do their thing. But the dogs have to follow them, so it's really important. Yeah, so I guess that's the best thing. The collars, I think they're just brilliant. If I could get a fencing collar, it'd be a great way to keep them in. Our fences we have a combination of 6 strands of parameter. Our parameter fences are really strong. So in between, less strong. And in a way, that's okay. I want the dogs to be able to kind of get through and jump through and that kind of thing. They can hurdle pretty major fences, like 5-foot fences. So the 6 strands of electric keeps them in. And the 8-foot barbed wire with the, not barbed wire, 8-foot chain link at the solar with 2 feet of barbed wire works. And then we have other fences that are a combination of cedar rail and graduated page wire. That sometimes keeps them in. Mostly what keeps them in is they start to understand this is the territory and stay within the territory. But they get bored. And that's where it's important to have, I call it the dog jail. It's important to have a dog kennel combination, and not a teeny tiny one that's designed for a Labrador Retriever, decent size, so that you can park them in there if you have to. But that thing has to be covered at the top, and it has to be not like the ability not to dig, and some kind of basic shelter. And so we do have a jail, and we put them in there. We need to, or if we just need to treat them, or if they get hurt and I have to have quick access to them, who knows? There's all sorts of. I facetiously call it a jail, but it's not really horrible. It's actually probably better than most people's kennels, but yeah, it just has to be Fort Knox because those dogs can get through just about anything. Wow. So yeah, which is sort of what you want them to be able to do in the real world, right? Like in their real world, it's pretty rough going sometimes. So they have to be athletic and strong and healthy and all those things. So.
Yeah. We were chatting a little bit about, some of the issues when picking a dog. And so I'm wondering if you might have some tips on choosing a breeder. And are there any best practices to ensure that you end up with a healthy dog?
Yeah, so the main thing I said is I pick them from a place where they're working dogs and they work all the time, and that's intentional. Or it's a breeder that is breeding dogs to go into a working environment, not for pet purposes. And backyard breeders is actually too many, really. That's the problem, and it's really sad. But and what is even sadder is that I think there's too many of these dogs being sort of sent out into the world, and they're very, very cute. They look like little polar bears, especially the white ones, right? When they're polar bear cubs, when they're first born. And then if you have a litter of 10, 12, 8, whatever, to find 8 to 12 working farms is per litter is tough. It's a tough ask. So I'm pretty careful, and I ask a lot of questions, and I make sure that like the breeder I've worked with a lot with Gampers, I tell her what I need, and I have ended up with, we imported a dog actually from the Turkish-Armenian border, and we did it all correctly, through all the proper channels and vaccinated and whatnot. And she was very aggressive, like very, very aggressive. I had to rehome her to a place where she's in a very isolated ranch situation, and she's doing really well there. But she was a great guardian, but too aggressive. Like it was just too much responsibility in the environment that I'm in to. I mean, if anybody's pet dog had stuck a toe on our property, it would have been done, So I don't want a dog that's that trigger aggressive. It's just not worth it. And the other thing that I'm really careful with is because of the people factor in our environment, including our own family. We have 5 children who are all now adults, but they have a lot of significant others and a lot of people in our lives. And any dog that shows the teeniest bit of aggression, even as a pup, and you can get that kind of aggression showing up already in a pup. That's just a definite no for me. Like I draw big lines in some areas. And the other thing is just making sure most breeders will do that first round of vaccines. But if it's coming from a working farm, as long as you have open, decent communication and you trust the person, you can work out the vaccinations when you bring them back to your farm, or if they're a pup. If it's an older dog, yeah, you want to have it all vaccinated. And I have worked, as I said, with a local rescue. And that dog was, everything up to date and microchipped and, all the things done. Microchipping these days is probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. I haven't done it in the past, but I can see the value because, they do sometimes wander, and it is a way of finding, if they wander too far. But and a lot of the behaviors, though, is stuff you've got. It's not that you train them, you keep reinforcing and creating an environment that supports the correct behavior. I think that's more important than like all the, the potential disciplinary action you could take, because they don't really respond to that. They respond to the stimulation of the environment, especially the European breeds. So if you set up the environment correctly and kind of give them a sense of boundaries and where the limits are, through your voice, but also just mostly through your body language and your actions, and then put them in with sheep, like right from the get-go. Do not put them in your living room or your kitchen when it's cold, that kind of thing. Like put them make them the dog that you want them to be, like put them in an environment where if you want them in your kitchen for the next 10 years, then fine. That's what you want to do. But then be prepared to do that for the next 10 years, even when you have a full-grown dog who's going to want a lot of activity and movement and have a need to protect something, right? So if that's what you want, great, but it's a bit of a risky thing to try. But if you want them in a barn, like we'll raise pups in a barn. That's the most common way. I mean, we've had pups. We haven't done it too often. We've done it a few times. We set up a big pen with straw bales, and then so they're in the barn from the time they're born.
Right.
So that's those smells, everything about that is comforting for them, and that makes them want to return.
That makes sense.
But I don't want a dog hanging out in the barn either, frankly, all the time, right? I want them out with the sheep. So it's it's a constant setting. It's a lot like working with kids in a way, right? Yes, you can say things, but do our kids actually listen when they say things? Not always. It's often what we do and what we show and what we create as a platform for them to function off of. I see the farm almost as a canvas or my landscape, and then I'm constantly adjusting things and moving things around, and the animals and everything functions within that.
What health checks, Sarah, and vaccinations or biosecurity steps are essential to prevent bringing home a disease like parvo with puppies?
Yeah, I haven't had a personal experience with it, but what I do is I just do all the same protocol I would do with any of our dogs. Like I have border collies, and they are out and about with a lot of people. So and other dogs at times, not all the time, but at times. We just do the typical round of vaccines. Like if the breeder hasn't the farm where they've come from, because in my case, I have always bought from a farm. So if they haven't, for some reason, done the first, I'm thinking of at the beginning of the pandemic when it was like impossible to get into a vet. So, and still to this day, it's very challenging for some environments to get access to a vet in a timely way. You almost have to book before the puppies are conceived in order to get a vet appointment, which takes a heck of a lot of organization and planning ahead of time. So I will make sure they get that it's 3 rounds of the vaccine. It's pretty typical. It kind of covers all the things. Rabies is important, of course. To me, in my mind, rabies is more important. When we imported, we were like, it was super important. Like they went into quarantine and, like there's a lot of things you have to do for that, but that's a whole different ball game. And I would never recommend anybody do that unless they're working with a very sort of knowledgeable person and a good vet to make that happen. But generally a domestic dog, I would I would do all the typical things you're supposed to do. And it's worth doing when they're young. It's easy to move a livestock guardian dog in and out of the vet. You can also request, and I've done this before, if you have other large animals that the vet's going to come out for, like horses or cows. We raise bob calves here, and anything like that where you have an opportunity, nab it, because then it goes under the farm cost, and it also just gets done, which is a lot easier than dragging these dogs, especially as they get older, into the vet. But you get most of those vaccines done before they're really hard to handle physically, and because a gamper is like 150 pounds or 60 pounds at full, a male gamper. So like hauling that thing in the truck to a vet and hanging on to it and asking them to do the same is just like, it's so much easier if the vet can just do it on site, right? So, but so the protocols have been around forever. So for keeping dogs healthy, I think that because vaccines in general have been such a big question for so many people especially in the last few years, apparently the vaccination rates have gone down for everything, humans and animals. That there's a lot of questioning about that, but I think it's because we've had herd immunity, frankly, that we've been able to get away with that, So things are starting to pop up. And the other piece is it's really important for as a country, so that we don't get, animals can go cross borders and, things like that without, like I was thinking, like our border collies, where I used to before all the mess with the American border. People were going back and forth with border collies, over the border. So for trialing and training and that kind of thing. And you have to have your vaccines all up to date, and you don't want to expose anybody to rabies or have that make that become an issue at an international level, which can happen. So I'll
also put in a plug for deworming. Because
true. Yeah. Okay. I will. Yeah. That is another thing. I do deworm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sorry. I forgot about that. Yes, we absolutely deworm. And in our case, we have to do tick protection all the time. Like we give them Lyme vaccines, and we give them pills that are supposed to protect them for 3 months. And it does seem to work for ticks. But deworming, it's pretty rough on a dog, especially a young dog, if you don't do the deworming. I don't know. They start to look pretty. If you don't deworm, you can kind of notice it. It's just like the sheep. You just got to deworm. So it's, and I deworm at least once, but usually twice a year for a general broad spectrum dewormer for the older dogs. For the pups, I do it more frequently. And then it just gradually gets less frequent. And I just watch them, keep an eye on them, and, see what's going on. So. But in our case, and probably increasingly in lots of parts of Ontario, ticks are a big issue. Like even if your dog's hanging out in grass and hedgerows and wood areas, you better have tick protection of some sort, because they're going to have Lyme if you don't. So,
good point by you. Yeah. So, Sarah, in your experience, from puppy to full-fledged guardian dog, how long does it usually take before an LGD can work unsupervised? And then, you've talked a lot about training, but also what supervision matters most during that time?
Yeah, and training is a bit different than training way I train a border collie or way I train a pet dog. It's not you're not out there training them exactly. It's, as I said, setting the ground conditions and the environment, the landscape, whatever you want to call it, setting the environment that they have to work in so that they experience more success than, and then when they do experience or behave in a way that's negative, then you can, or negative for your situation, then you can correct it as much as you can. And I think some of that goes in. I don't know sometimes whether it all goes in. I think it's often me just continuously setting them up for success that they almost self-teach how to. And sometimes that's easier said than done. I mean, you try to do all that, but it's not like I haven't, when I figure it all out, I'll probably be on my way out. But so it's always a learning process. They're not under full supervision much past their early puppyhood. Like they are, but I don't stick them out with all the big adult dogs right away. I let them find their feet in the sort of barn and barnyard area with a smaller group of sheep. I'll even bring in a small group of sheep just to hang out with them. So they, you have to be. I think it's very unfair to stick a younger animal. They just don't have the knowledge. I mean, their instincts there, but it have to kick in, and they just have to mature. I mean, you're asking a lot if you're ever out camping in an environment like this, for instance, overnight, you cannot believe the activity that's going on with predators and this constant callback. And they have to learn that, but you need to allow them to grow up enough physically, even if nothing else, and mentally, to not get overwhelmed, both physically and mentally. We've lost a dog to a coyote brawl, it was the way we call it. And I don't know what happened, but there was some big kerfuffle. We heard it in the middle of the night and the dog died. So it's just asking a lot of a young dog to, and I think you can overwhelm them mentally pretty quickly. That's true with an adult dog too, actually, if you're not careful. But so yeah, it's it's about 18 months till I find they finally slip into their happy working groove around 2. I have a dog that I was like losing my marbles over in January of this year, and he's out at a solar site right now, working with a group of sheep, and he is phenomenal now. Like, I'm so glad, but I had to park him in that jail I'm talking about for a little while during lambing because I just did not trust him. He was just being so like rushing at the sheep and chasing and even grabbing some and doing all the things that you kind of think, oh my goodness, I raised a really bad dog here. But then he just completely turned when he had his own, he's with one other dog, but he's got his own space now. But he's 2. And I think he turned 2 in May. So just before we went out and to the sites, and and phenomenal dog now. Like, I'm so glad I didn't, I was so close to thinking maybe this dog isn't for us. So you got to give them time. And I think I go through this with, my husband always reminds me, like, every dog we get, I'm about ready to like wring their little necks by the time they get to a certain age. And then finally it's like they almost like slip through and then they're good. But if they're not working very well by 2, you still got these ongoing behaviors. It is hard I don't know how easy it is to switch behaviors. You probably could. But again, it's all environment, right? You've got to continue putting them in environments where they can learn from their own mistakes and learn. It's got to trigger their instinct, and they have to learn from their own mistakes. Without getting overwhelmed or really hurt, because they can get really hurt. The supervision part I have to do the most with young animals is before I neuter or spay. And frankly, if you want to have a dog that's primary for working, and I don't recommend breeding unless there's a really good reason for it, you really do want to neuter or spay, because that's where the biggest fights happen, and that's where you get unhealthy aggression, and you get all sorts of strange behaviors. You get wandering. It's all because they're not able to kind of do what they're wanting to do. So I think in having females and males together that you're trying to keep apart as livestock guarding dogs, it's hard enough to keep a dog contained if they're not desperately wanting to go out and breed. So I can't imagine. I mean, I know people struggle to keep them, but it's very expensive. So, I mean, you have to have all those shots, and you have to But there are spay neuter clinics, and I highly recommend if you're not planning to breed, and even if, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, just give yourself a bit of a break by getting them spayed or neutered, and then you're still going to have to deal with some stuff, but not like you would if you are dealing with an intact dog as well, because that's a whole level of aggression that you or behavioral stuff that I just don't want to do it unless I have to, and I don't have to. So
that's understandable for sure. So,
Yeah.
Sarah, when dealing with people outside of agriculture who don't understand or who might not understand LGDs, how do you explain the dog's role and lifestyle, especially since their work can sometimes be mistaken for neglect when they're living out in the fields in hot summer days or cold winter days?
yeah, it's a lot of education. I do live in an area that was very rural when we first moved here. It's becoming what I would call more urban. It's like there's a lot more suburban style development, not full on suburbs, but rural suburban. So I have a lot of people around me, and that is probably my biggest conflict point as a farm is people love the sheep. They love what we're doing, the style of farming that we're doing. I mean, I get constant support from that. They like the dogs, but they're kind of scared of them because they're so big, and they also have a number of backyards that basically just back right onto our farm. So the dogs do get confused. Like if a coyote is jumping over that fence, I mean, they just follow it, right? Because that's so I just do a lot of explaining and educating and apologizing if the dog does get out. It's so vital that we have these dogs. So I tell them that I can't have this farm if I can't have these dogs. And I said, I can't tie them up. And if I had one person who was very upset because I don't know why one of the dogs just kept on going over to her property. And it was just confusing me. I found out later that there was a coyote den right in behind her backyard, and she didn't even know. Like kind of an area where this dog had pups. And once I showed her that, she's like, oh, she was shocked, they don't even realize sometimes what's going on. But I showed her, I don't do this unless I absolutely had to, but I showed her a couple of pictures of sheep that have been killed by a coyote, just because I think it's nothing like seeing the real life version of what actually happens when you don't have these dogs working effectively. So I said, I also really argue for wildlife. I say, I'm not trying to get rid of coyotes. I mean, I want to live on a farm that supports wildlife as well as my domestic animals. And I love the natural environment, and it's something that kind of, it's a constant joy for me. So but I do need to have some balance. And, I always say that I'm willing to share a little, but not all my sheep. So that's my financial, I need to pay my way on this farm. So it's, I'll show them. I'll be completely honest if I have to, but I am constantly sending out text message. Also get to know your neighbors a little bit, because if they know what's going on, and they know you, they're much more likely to be supportive, because usually the dog isn't doing anything horrible. Like they're often just jumping the fence to kind of follow a coyote, or sometimes the sheep get through and then they're just following with the sheep. And I mean, I don't want any of that to happen. It's not what I want, but it's still going to happen at some point. And so it's a lot of education. I'm a little careful with the barking, because constant barking drives me nuts. So I've been actually a little bit selective. And that's one thing I like about the Gampers is they don't constantly bark. They patrol, but they're not like barking the whole time. They're patrolling. They only bark when they have to. The young Piers and Brahmas can be quite annoying that way. Like they'll just bark, 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 bark. And then I try to keep the sheep further away from all the houses so that the bark, bark, bark doesn't drive them crazy. Because I get that would be annoying. And then other than that, I educate, but I use the movement of sheep and animals to kind of work with, it's part of my environment of having these houses around me. So we have lots of acreage where there aren't houses. So I just try to keep the sheep in a different part at that time of the year when the dogs might be barking more. So, yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So, talk to us about the lifespan of an LGD as we close off. How long can they be on your farm, and then what does their life look like when that time comes to an end?
Okay. Yeah. I've never given a dog away at the end of its working life. As a matter of fact, I think all our dogs work in the capacity they can until they pass away, because that's where they're happiest. They are not happy. As a matter of fact, if you start trying to bring them to the barn, it's almost like a signal to them that there's something seriously wrong. And so what I do with the dogs, the bigger issue for me is not how they pass away, because I euthanize them if they're in a lot of pain or something's wrong, really seriously wrong. But it's as they age, giving them appropriate work and giving them enough support and backup, so that they're not putting themselves in a position where they're working beyond their physical capacity. I mean, it's like trying to make a 75 or 80-year-old, go out and run a marathon, right? So like 14 kilometers a night is a lot for an old dog. But one of the dogs I have right now is 9, and he's still doing 12 to 14K a night, but he'll slow down naturally on his own. And I'm a little extra careful with feed. If it's really, really cold, I give them a lot of extra fat in the winter to kind of, like in some form, oil, meat, whatever. Just to give them that little extra fat cover, because I find as they get older, they don't keep their weight on as well. And then I just do all the things. I do make sure they have access as they get really elderly. I will make sure they can always access shelter anyways, one way or another, natural or barn. But I make sure they absolutely have. And if I had one older dog who was a phenomenal dog who would work. He literally worked till he died. He died working. And he, at the very end of his life, the last winter, it was an extremely cold winter for some reason. I actually did put a coat on him, and much to his embarrassment, I thought he was going to die of embarrassment with his coat on. But then after a while, you got kind of used to it, because it was a winter, I don't know, a bunch of years ago, and it was like hitting minus 27, 29 every night. And that was the only dog I've ever done that with, but he was so determined to stay out in the field right in the middle of everything that I was a little worried that he was going to, he was shivering. Like I could tell he was getting cold. So I was and he was happy with that. Or I, kind of make sure, but they're usually pretty animals are smart. If you give them options, they're pretty smart to take the options that work for them. They're always, if you want to find out where the coolest spot in a field is when it's hot, go find the LGD. They find the little spot where the breeze just comes through a certain area. And same thing with the winter, right? They'll dig themselves big holes in the snow, and they're right down. So they've got like all the insulation of the snow around them, and all you can see is this little white head that's like, it looks like furry snow basically. Wow. Above the, so they're pretty smart. Like if you let them learn how to live in the environment that you've created, and not try to jump them from one type of environment into another, they're really, they learn. They're smarter than we are at how to handle that environment, right? They're out in it 24/7. So I don't have a lot. And then it's really when they get to the point where sometimes a dog coyote brawl will happen, or something will happen, or they'll just get sick. They can get cancer or something. And if something's going, as long as they have quality of life, I just let them have their life. And I'm never going to prop up a LGD endlessly. Even if I had the money to do it, I just don't think it's fair to kind of force them into a different lifestyle at the very tail end of their life. So they usually just become physically so incapable, and then it's time for them to pass on. So
as my dad would say, they went with their boots on.
Yeah, and that's exactly, and frankly, I can't say there aren't too many. And the average lifespan, I assume 10 years is a decent working life. They're actually quite long. People say that apparently LGDs have a pretty shortened lifespan often because they get hit by cars, but that's not actually been a big thing for us. I don't think we've ever had one hit by a car, touch wood. Hopefully that never happens. And we're in a fairly, populated environment, as I said. So, but they do get just old. They get very arthritic. It's arthritic. Oh, that's the other thing I'll often do is they get very arthritic, like any of these big dogs. And so I will give them like a daily thing with their food just to help with the arthritis. Also, so they can continue working to some extent, because it always takes you a little bit almost by surprise. Like they kind of hit that age. It's like, oh no, I need another dog. And you can't expect them to do it anymore, but you haven't got one quite in the wings or quite at the right age. Or that happened to us last year. So, We had 7 dogs up until last year, and one died in a coyote thing, and another one died just of old age at 14. That's what. So sometimes they can live longer, but I mean, he was clearly past it. We had to put him down, and and then when the other one we had to rehome because she was just too aggressive. So now we're down to 4. But you just do what you have to do. I always figure all my farm animals. Yes, they're farm animals, but it's like you just make the best possible life you can from birth to cradle to grave, right? I mean, and I don't say that in a sucky kind of woo-woo way. I just mean, I honestly think that's our duty as farmers to steward whatever's in our responsibility for that period. And that includes the guardian dogs. And putting them in a house on a sofa is not what guardian dogs like. Like it's, that basically is it.
Thank you. It's been really great to have this conversation today about guardian dogs, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Okay, that's no problem. No.
Yeah,
it's been fascinating.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Flock Talk, please subscribe through your podcast app to receive alerts to our future episodes, and please share our podcast with your friends.
For more Ontario Sheep Farmers content, follow us on social media under the handle @Ontario Sheep Farmers on Instagram and Facebook, and visit our website, ontariosheep.org, for more resources.